It is October of 732 AD, somewhere between the cities of Tours and Poitiers in what is now central France. The field is absolute carnage. To the left, Frankish infantry in tightly locked shield walls, standing shoulder to shoulder in formations so dense that fallen men cannot even collapse to the ground. They are pressed upright by the sheer mass of bodies around them. The stench of blood and urine and burning flesh hangs in the air like fog. To the right, wave after wave of Umayyad cavalry, the finest light horsemen the world has ever seen, riding Arabian and Andalusian mounts. Bred for speed and endurance, their riders screaming the name of God as they crash again and again into the Frankish lines. Hoofbeats like rolling thunder. And in the center of this storm, barely visible through the smoke and the press of bodies, a man, a single man, broad-shouldered, a war hammer in his right hand, slick with blood to the elbow. He is not tall, but he is unmovable, like a stone placed in the center of a river. Men are dying around him, men are screaming, and he does not move. His name is Charles. They will one day call him the Hammer. And on this day, this single October day in the middle of the 8th century, the entire trajectory of Western civilization rests on whether he can hold this line. Somewhere between 50,000 and 400,000 men have come together on this field. Historians still argue about the numbers. What they do not argue about is the stakes. This was not a border skirmish. This was not a raid. This was the northernmost tip of the most explosive military expansion in human history, and it had come here to this muddy French field to be stopped. Or not stopped. This is the Battle of Tours. And this is how it happened. To understand why the Battle of Tours matters, to truly feel the weight of it, you need to understand what the world looked like in October of 732 AD. 100 years earlier, in the early 600s, a merchant named Muhammad in the Arabian city of Mecca began receiving what he believed were divine revelations. Within decades of his death in 632 AD, his followers had exploded outward from the Arabian Peninsula in one of the most breathtaking military and ideological expansions in recorded history. We are not talking about slow generational drift. We are talking about a transformation so rapid it left the ancient world gasping. Within a single human lifetime, within the span of years a child born in 632 AD might still be alive to witness, the armies of Islam had conquered Persia, swallowed the Levant, seized Egypt and all of North Africa, swept across the Strait of Gibraltar into the Iberian Peninsula, what we now call Spain and Portugal, and were pressing through the Pyrenees into the heart of what had once been the Roman Empire's western provinces. Think about what that means geographically. In the year 622 AD, Islam controlled a modest stretch of desert around Mecca and Medina. By 732 AD, 110 years later, its political and military reach extended from the borders of China in the east, across Central Asia, through the Persian heartland, across the entire width of the Middle East, all of North Africa, the entire Iberian Peninsula, and now, into the kingdom of the Franks. The Roman Empire had taken centuries to build what the Umayyad Caliphate had assembled in a century. By 732 AD, the Islamic world was governed by what historians call the Umayyad Caliphate, named after the Umayyad dynasty that had risen to control the Muslim empire after the death of Muhammad and the period of the early caliphs. The Umayyads ruled from Damascus, in what is now Syria, and at their height, they presided over the largest empire the world had ever seen. The Umayyad army that poured into France in 732 was not a horde. Let us be clear about this. This was a sophisticated, experienced, battle-hardened military machine. These were men who had spent decades fighting and winning some of the hardest wars in the ancient world, against the Byzantine Empire, against the Sassanid Persians, against Berber tribes in North Africa, against Visigothic kingdoms in Spain. They knew how to fight. They knew how to win. The force that entered France was led by Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, the Wali, or governor of Al-Andalus, which was the Muslim name for the Iberian Peninsula. Abd al-Rahman was not just a political appointee. He was a general's general, a man who had earned his command through decades of actual combat. He was courageous to the point of recklessness, deeply pious, and respected by his men with something approaching reverence. Abd al-Rahman had been appointed governor of Al-Andalus in 730 AD, and almost immediately he began organizing what he clearly intended to be a decisive campaign into Frankish territory. This was not improvised. He spent at least 2 years consolidating his forces, gathering intelligence on Frankish defenses, and building the logistical support needed for a major northern campaign. Now let us talk about the army itself, because understanding its composition is essential to understanding both its incredible successes and ultimately its defeat at Tours. The Umayyad force that crossed the Pyrenees into Frankish territory in 732 was a multi-ethnic, multilingual army that reflected the extraordinary breadth of the empire. At its core were Arab warriors, men from the Arabian Peninsula and Syria who represented the original conquering class of the Islamic world. These were the heavy cavalrymen, the experienced commanders, the ideological heart of the force. Alongside them rode enormous contingents of Berbers, the indigenous people of North Africa who had been conquered by the Arabs roughly a generation earlier and had, in many cases, converted to Islam with genuine fervor. The Berbers were exceptional horsemen in their own right, and their addition to the Umayyad army had dramatically increased its cavalry strength. There was, however, tension. The Berbers occupied a somewhat inferior social position within the army, were paid less than Arab troops, and were sometimes given the most dangerous assignments. This tension would become relevant later. The army also included Persian and other Eastern troops, converted Christians from Iberia, and various subject peoples who served in auxiliary roles. The total size of the army is one of the most hotly contested questions in medieval military history. Contemporary and near-contemporary sources are wildly inconsistent. The Mozarabic Chronicle of 754, written only 22 years after the battle by a Christian living under Muslim rule in Spain, uses the Latin phrase Ismaelitarum exercitus, the army of the Ishmaelites, without giving a number. Frankish sources that came later inflated the figures for dramatic effect, with some claiming numbers as high as 300,000 to 400,000 men, which most modern historians consider absurdly exaggerated. Modern scholarly consensus places the Umayyad army at somewhere between 20,000 and 80,000 men, based on logistical analysis of movement through Pyrenean passes. Most historians cite 50,000 to 60,000 total fighters, with 30,000 to 40,000 being cavalry. This cavalry proportion was crucial. The Umayyad army was built around the horse. Its tactical doctrine emphasized speed, shock, mobility, and the ability to envelop and pursue. Infantry held ground while cavalry delivered decisive blows. This was the machine that had conquered much of the known world. Cavalry was organized into units of 1,000, called an alf. Each alf had smaller units, a mi'a of 100 men, led by a quaid. Mi'a was subdivided into asharat of 10, led by an arif. The army had a vanguard, main body, wings, and a rear guard. Abd al-Rahman commanded the Kalb. The vanguard scouted, and the rear guard protected the enormous supply train, laden with treasure from Aquitaine. Remember that baggage train. It will matter enormously. Now, let us cross to the other side of the battle. By 732 AD, the Frankish kingdom was not at its strongest. Politically, the nominal king was Theuderic IV. But Theuderic was, in historians' polite phrase, a do-nothing king. He was a figurehead. The actual power of the Frankish kingdom resided in the office of the mayor of the palace. The mayor of the palace in 732 was Charles Martel. And Charles Martel was one of the most formidable military figures of the early medieval period. Charles was born around 688 AD, the illegitimate son of Pepin of Herstal. The word martel, the hammer, was not a nickname he was born with. It was one he earned through years of brutal, unrelenting military campaigning. By 732, he had been waging war almost continuously for decades. He fought to unify the fractious Frankish sub-kingdoms under his authority, suppressing rebellions, neutralizing rivals, expanding Frankish territory. He was, by any measure, a political and military genius. But he was also ruthless, as men who fight their way up from contested legitimacy tend to be. He had been imprisoned by his stepmother Plectrude after his father's death, and had broken out of prison, raised an army, and fought his way to power. He had defeated rivals at the Battle of Amblève in 716 and the Battle of Vincy in 717. He was not a man who had inherited easy authority. Every bit of his power had been won on the battlefield. By 732, he was approximately 44 years old, in the prime of medieval military leadership, old enough to be experienced and strategically wise, young enough to still fight in the front line himself. And based on every account, he did fight in the front line. This was not a general who directed from the rear. Charles Martel led from the front, which both inspired his men and gave him intimate understanding of the battle. In terms of personality, sources paint a picture of a man who was magnetic, decisive, and possessed of an almost eerie calm under pressure. He was deeply religious in the Frankish Christian tradition, though his relationship with the church was complicated. He had controversially seized church lands to fund his military campaigns, a decision that earned him powerful ecclesiastical enemies. Abd al-Rahman's campaign of 732 was not the first Umayyad probe into Frankish territory. There had been earlier raids. The most significant was Al-Sam ibn Malik's campaigns, who had besieged Toulouse around 721 AD before being killed in battle by Odo the Great. Now, Odo of Aquitaine is a character we need to spend some time with because his role in the lead-up to Tours is complicated. His relationship with Charles Martel was anything but simple. Odo was the ruler of Aquitaine, semi-independent from Frankish authority. He had in fact fought wars against Charles Martel. He was, in other words, a rival. His defeat of Al-Samf in 721 had made him famous, but it had also given him an excessive confidence in his ability to handle the Muslim threat. In what historians regard as a catastrophic miscalculation, Odo formed an alliance around 730 AD with Uthman ibn Naisar, or Munuza. Munuza was a Berber governor who had rebelled against Abd al-Rahman's authority. Odo even gave Munuza his daughter in marriage to seal the alliance. When Abd al-Rahman crushed Munuza's rebellion in 731, killing Munuza and sending Odo's daughter to Damascus as a captive, the campaign of 732 had a personal dimension beyond the political. Abd al-Rahman invaded Aquitaine partly as retribution. The invasion was devastating. The Umayyad army crossed the Pyrenees in the spring or early summer of 732. They moved north through Gascony with terrifying efficiency. Odo gathered his forces and met them at the Battle of the River Garonne. The result was catastrophic for the Franks. Odo's army was shattered. The Chronicle of 754 says that only God knew the number of the slain. Odo fled. The Umayyad army then sacked Bordeaux, burning churches, killing or enslaving the population, and moved northeast toward Tours. Why Tours? Because Tours was the home of the Basilica of Saint Martin, the spiritual and financial heart of the Frankish kingdom. The basilica held enormous treasures, and Tours was a symbol of Frankish Christian civilization. Taking Tours would be both practically and symbolically devastating. But before Abd al-Rahman could reach Tours, he faced two problems. First, Odo, humiliated and desperate, had done something that must have cost him enormously in pride. He had ridden north to Charles Martel and asked for help. Second, Charles Martel was ready. Now let us examine the Frankish military force that Charles assembled to meet Abd al-Rahman. The Frankish army of 732 was fundamentally different from the Umayyad force in its composition, its doctrine, and its strengths. Where the Umayyad force was cavalry dominant, the Frankish force was predominantly infantry. This was not a weakness per se. It was a different philosophy of war, rooted in the Germanic and Merovingian military traditions that Charles had inherited and refined. The core of the Frankish infantry was the heavy foot soldier, a warrior who fought in a dense, interlocked shield wall. These men wore iron ringmail, carried long spears, franciscas, and single-edged swords called scramasaxes. Their shields were large, round or oval, made of lime wood faced with leather, and fitted with an iron boss. The shield wall, Sildwell in Germanic tradition, was their tactical signature. It was nearly impenetrable to cavalry. Horses instinctively refused to charge into a wall of raised shields and leveled spears. This was a deeply ingrained tactical instinct. honed through generations of warfare against other Germanic peoples, Viking raiders, and on the kingdom's periphery. The Frankish army was organized around a military levy, the obligation of free men to render military service. At the highest level were the professional warriors of the royal household, the Antrustians, bound to Charles by oath. These were full-time soldiers. Below them were contingents provided by great Frankish lords, holding land for military service. These were the milites, fighting men of status. Below them, broader levies, free farmers and craftsmen called up in emergency. Charles had been at war for years. His army was more professional than the levy structure suggested. His veterans had fought for a decade. The size of the Frankish army at Tours is harder to estimate than the Umayyad force. Contemporary sources are vague. Modern estimates range from 15,000 to 70,000, with scholarly figures around 25 to 45,000 men. They were almost certainly outnumbered, possibly significantly so, fighting a cavalry-dominant army with predominantly infantry. On paper, this should have been a catastrophe for Charles. But Charles had something the numbers don't show. He chose where to fight. Charles Martel marched his army south and selected the battlefield with the care of a chess grandmaster. The location, near the Roman road between Tours and Poitiers, was chosen for a specific reason. It was bisected by a river and flanked by forest and higher ground. This channeled the Umayyad cavalry. The terrain would negate the decisive advantage of the Muslim horsemen, who needed room to maneuver. The Frankish chain of command was straightforward. Charles commanded the center personally. His brother Childebrand, a capable general, commanded the left flank. Frankish counts led their contingents. Odo of Aquitaine, swallowing his pride, served in a subordinate role, his cavalry forming wings or a mobile reserve. The relationship between Charles and Odo was fascinating due to its tension. These men had been enemies. Now they stood in the same battle line against a common threat. This was not Hollywood, but two pragmatic men. What if the man who saved Western civilization was technically illegitimate, imprisoned and left for dead? And the army he built to stop history's greatest military expansion was assembled partly with stolen church money. Charles Martel is one of the most complicated heroes in the medieval world, and we're just getting started. Here's a question for the comments. Who was the more impressive commander, Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi or Charles Martel? And why? Let me know below. This debate has been going on for 1,300 years. The exact date of the Battle of Tours is uncertain. Most accept October 732, many historians say October 10th. This date derives from later medieval sources and should be treated with caution. The battle was almost certainly fought in autumn. In the days before the main engagement, there were preliminary skirmishes, probing actions by cavalry units. The Mozarabic Chronicle tells us the armies faced each other for 7 days, with daily skirmishing. Think about what those 7 days meant for both commanders. For Abd al-Rahman, looking across at the Frankish lines, the sight would have been both impressive and puzzling. He had smashed Odo at the Garonne, swept through Aquitaine. He had never encountered a Frankish force in full defensive posture. What he saw was something his cavalry-centered doctrine was not ideally suited to attack, a dense, deep, well-positioned infantry mass. For Charles, watching the Umayyad cavalry demonstrate, those rippling screens of horsemen meant to intimidate and probe. The days of waiting were an exercise in absolute psychological iron. Every day the cavalry demonstrated its speed and skill. It was a message. We are faster, more agile, and we will choose the moment of attack. Charles needed his men to watch that and not break. He needed them to understand their advantage was mass, weight. It was the simple, terrible willingness to absorb punishment and remain standing. During this period, both commanders made their final assessments. Abd al-Rahman recognized the terrain was unfavorable, but he had advantages he believed were insurmountable. He had numerical superiority, cavalry superiority, and a fighting force at the peak of its historical power, riding the momentum of a century of unbroken victories. And he had something else, his baggage train, loaded with loot. This was, paradoxically, both his greatest asset and a growing liability. The treasure was causing problems. As days dragged on, some Berber troops agitated about plunder distribution. Abd al-Rahman managed these tensions, but they were simmering. A prolonged stalemate was only in his interest with discipline. On the Frankish side, Charles was doing something equally important, reinforcing the psychological toughness of his men. He moved through the ranks, spoke to his soldiers, prayed with his troops, and made himself visible as a physical presence. Not a remote commander on a hill, but a man who would stand with them in the line. This mattered enormously. On the night before the main engagement, both armies prepared in ways characteristic of their cultures. In the Umayyad camp, there was prayer. The rhythm of Islamic military life organized around 5 daily prayers. Abd al-Rahman himself was known for his piety, and accounts suggest he personally led prayers, reminding his commanders of the religious dimensions of the campaign. This was not mere propaganda. These men genuinely believed they were engaged in a sacred duty, and that belief made them formidable. Faith in one's cause does something to soldiers that no amount of tactical drill can replicate. After prayers, Abd al-Rahman and his senior commanders held a final council. Tactics for the following day were confirmed. The cavalry of both wings would attempt to envelop the Frankish flank simultaneously, while the center pinned the infantry. If the flanks succeeded, the battle would be over quickly. The baggage train problem would resolve itself. The campaign could continue north, and the path to Paris and beyond would be open. In the Frankish camp, Charles held his own council with Odo and his chief commanders. The defensive plan was set: hold the line, no pursuit, no heroic individual charges. The shield wall would stand, absorb, and hold. Charles knew the temptation for warriors to break formation. It was a risk to infantry discipline rooted in their warrior culture. He needed his men to resist it. A haunting detail from the night before the battle. Autumn temperatures in France dip significantly after dark. Frankish men, farmers and craftsmen lay on the cold ground, thinking about what was coming. They had watched Umayyad cavalry for 7 days, counting enemy fires, trying to gauge their true size. They ate bread, sharpened spears, and prayed to St. Martin, hoping to survive the morning. In the small hours, fires burned low. The darkness between the two armies was complete. As the sun rose on the day of battle, both armies moved into their battle formations. The Frankish deployment was methodical and deliberate. Charles arranged his infantry in a dense, compact formation, multiple ranks deep, with veterans in front and less experienced men behind them. This depth was a deliberate tactical choice to maintain cohesion, a human wall 10 or 15 men deep. Flanks were anchored by terrain. Forest and higher ground limited Umayyad cavalry. Odo's horsemen were on the wings, not for attack, but as screening and early warning. Charles himself took his position in the center of the front line. This was not symbolic. On the Umayyad side, Abd al-Rahman deployed his army in traditional formation. Cavalry on both wings, a strong center, with the best Arab cavalry in critical positions. The vanguard moved forward to begin the engagement. The baggage train sat behind, protected. The morning was cool, the ground firm. The light was gray and thin. Then the horns and drums of the Umayyad army began to sound. The first Umayyad cavalry charge came from the right wing, aimed at the Frankish left flank. This was standard doctrine: probe the flanks first, find the weakest point, exploit it. What happened next is the core tactical story of the Battle of Tours. The cavalry hit the Frankish shield wall, and the shield wall held. This sounds simple. It was not simple. A cavalry charge in the 8th century was terrifying. The ground shook. The noise was deafening. Thunder of hooves, screaming, crash of metal. The psychological pressure to break, to run, to do anything but stand was incomprehensible. And the Frankish infantry stood. The horses would not go into the spears and shields, a biological reality for cavalry commanders. Umayyad cavalry slowed, sheared off, wheeled, and reformed. Dead horses and men lay before the line. The left wing then attacked the Frankish right with similar results. Again, the shield wall held. Abd al-Rahman now committed his center cavalry in force, pressing both wings again. This was the big push, designed to overwhelm through sheer mass. For hours, waves of cavalry attacked. Each wave did damage, pushing the line backward, only to be met by the depth of the formation. The noise must have been extraordinary. Medieval battles were wall-to-wall chaos. Screaming men and horses, crunch of bone, grunt of men taking impacts with shields. Frankish warriors were exhausted by midday. Their shield arms ached, spear hands slick. And still, the cavalry came. Charles moved constantly along his portion of the line, fighting and managing. Pulling men from the rear to replace fallen, reassuring, threatening, forcing wavering men back. This tactical leadership made the difference between a line that held and one that broke. Now we come to it, the turning point of the Battle of Tours, and it is not what you might expect. At some point, a portion of the Frankish force broke away and attacked the Umayyad baggage train. Let us be precise about what we mean by the baggage train. This was not just supplies. This was accumulated plunder, gold from churches, silver from monasteries, personal wealth. Treasures the individual Umayyad soldiers, especially Berber contingents, had been promised. This was their payment, their livelihood, their reason for being there. When news reached portions of the Umayyad cavalry that their baggage train was attacked, a portion of the army, predominantly Berber troops, broke off to protect their goods. From the Frankish perspective, this suddenly looked like a retreat. From the Umayyad perspective, it was starting to become one. Here is where Abd al-Rahman's generalship and personal courage are most on display. Abd al-Rahman, recognizing his force fragmenting, rode to rally the breaking troops. He needed to stop the disintegration before it became uncontrollable. He rode hard. He rode toward the wavering cavalry, and in doing so, he rode into the killing zone. He was surrounded. Accounts differ, but all sources agree on the outcome. Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi was killed. When the commander dies, the army dies with him, not immediately, not all at once. But the killing of Abd al-Rahman was the most decisive moment of the entire engagement. The moment that turned a difficult battle into a catastrophic defeat. Word spread through the Umayyad ranks like fire through dry grass. The commander is dead, and in the absence of a clear succession, the Umayyad force began to disintegrate. The cavalry units pulled back, first in ones and twos, then in streams, then in a flood. Charles Martel stood in his line and watched them go. He did not pursue. This extraordinary, difficult, tactically wise restraint is one of the most underappreciated decisions in medieval warfare. Every instinct of his warriors, every tradition of Frankish military culture screamed pursue them, chase them, cut them down. Charles refused. He knew his infantry, exhausted and battered, could not pursue cavalry on open ground without turning the pursued into pursuers. He knew a disordered infantry pursuit was exactly the scenario in which cavalry won by turning and riding down the men chasing them. He held his line. He let them go. The Umayyad army retreated south, back toward Iberia, leaving behind their dead, wounded, and crucially most of that baggage train. We just passed the turning point of the battle. Here's what I want you to think about. Charles Martel made 3 decisions that won the war. He chose the terrain. He held his line when every instinct screamed charge, and he refused to pursue when the enemy broke. Any one of those decisions, reversed, and the battle ends differently. The best generals aren't those who fight hardest. They're the ones who fight smartest. Do you think Charles Martel made the right call, not pursuing the retreating Umayyad army? Some historians argue he left an enormous opportunity. Others say it saved his army. What do you think? Drop your answer in the comments. The day after the battle, Charles Martel kept his army in formation, expecting a renewed attack. The Mozarabic Chronicle tells us that when Frankish scouts went to examine the Umayyad camp, they found it empty. Abd al-Rahman's army, without its commander, had slipped away in the night, leaving behind their tents, much baggage, and their dead. The Frankish army had survived. The immediate military consequences were significant. The Umayyad advance north of the Pyrenees was permanently broken. While raids continued, the momentum of the Great Northern Advance was broken. For Charles Martel personally, the victory was transformative. His reputation, already formidable, became legendary. The hammer had stopped the Saracens. Even his enemies within the Frankish church had to acknowledge the magnitude of what he had accomplished. He became effectively the most powerful man in Western Europe. For Odo of Aquitaine, the aftermath was complicated. His duchy had been devastated by the Umayyad campaign. He died in 735, leaving Aquitaine in a position of dependence on Frankish overlordship that his family had fought for decades to avoid. In saving his land, he had permanently subordinated it. In the years immediately following Tours, Charles Martel continued pushing the Umayyad presence back. This is often overlooked in accounts that treat Tours as the complete end of the story. It was not. There were further raids and campaigns. In 735 or 736, the Umayyad governor launched a new campaign into Provence. Charles responded with devastating force, campaigning in Provence and the Rhône Valley, defeating the Umayyad force there. He also briefly allied himself with the Lombards in northern Italy, recognizing that the threat was not just from the south. In 737, Umayyad forces captured Avignon. Charles besieged it, took it back, and then destroyed it so thoroughly it could not serve as a base for future operations. The final major military campaign came under Charles's son, Pepin the Short, who captured Narbonne, the last significant Umayyad stronghold in France, in 759, 27 years after Tours. At that point, the Muslim presence in what is now France was effectively ended, though Al-Andalus would survive for another 7 centuries. Now, the long-term consequences. And here we need to think carefully, because this is where historical interpretation becomes genuinely complex. The traditional view, articulated by Edward Gibbon, is that the Battle of Tours was the single most consequential battle in medieval history. Had Charles Martel lost, Islam would have swept through France, crossed the Rhine, and ultimately conquered all of Europe. The Umayyad horsemen would have ridden through Oxford and Paris and Rome, and Western civilization as we know it would have been extinguished. This view has the appeal of dramatic clarity. It also has serious problems. Modern historians have complicated the picture considerably. Some point out that the Umayyad army in 732 was not a full-scale invasion force. It was a large-scale raiding expedition aimed at loot and tribute. Others note that the Umayyad Caliphate was already showing internal strains. The Berber revolt of 740–743 would convulse Al-Andalus and kill far more Umayyad soldiers than Tours had. The great age of Islamic expansion was approaching its natural limits regardless of what happened in France. These are legitimate historical arguments, and we should take them seriously. And yet, even granting all of these qualifications, the long-term consequences of Tours are hard to minimize. First, Charles Martel's victory directly enabled the rise of the Carolingian dynasty. His prestige after Tours was such that his son Pepin the Short was able to depose the last Merovingian king and make himself the first Carolingian king. And Pepin's son was Charles the Great, Charlemagne, who would build the Carolingian Empire and become the defining political and cultural figure. There is a direct line from Tours to Charlemagne. Second, Tours established the military and political primacy of the heavy Frankish infantry tradition. The battle proved that cavalry-dominant armies could be defeated, that the right terrain, discipline, and leadership could neutralize an unstoppable force. This lesson shaped Frankish military doctrine for generations. Third, and perhaps most profoundly, Tours established Charles Martel as the defender of Latin Christianity at its moment of maximum vulnerability. The Pope, increasingly desperate for a military champion against both the Lombards in Italy and the Saracens in the south, turned to the Frankish mayors of the palace. This alliance between the Frankish crown and the papacy would shape the political and religious structure of Europe for the next 5 centuries. Fourth, the battle had enormous symbolic resonance that extended well beyond its immediate military consequences. For the Christian kingdoms of Europe, Tours became proof that the Islamic advance could be stopped, that God had not abandoned Christendom. A Christian army could stand against the force that had eaten the Persian Empire, the Byzantine provinces, and half the Roman world. This belief became foundational to a distinct sense of Western Christian identity that shaped European culture, politics, and religious self-understanding for centuries. For the Islamic world, Tours was a painful setback, but not a mortal wound. Al-Andalus survived and flourished. Cordoba became one of the great intellectual and cultural centers of the medieval world, where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars preserved and expanded classical heritage. At a time when much of Northern Europe was illiterate, the contribution of Islamic civilization to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy was immense. Al-Andalus endured until 1492, the same year Columbus sailed for the Americas. Its final fall, the Reconquista, was the closing chapter of the story that began at Tours. Here is the question that historians still argue about. Was Tours actually the decisive battle that saved Western civilization? Or have we been telling ourselves a comforting story for 1,300 years? The truth, as always, is more interesting than either extreme. And here's the thing about decisive battles. We only know they were decisive in retrospect. The men standing in that shield wall in October 732 didn't know they were saving civilization. They were just trying to survive the next 5 minutes. Charles Martel died in 741, 9 years after Tours. He died not in battle, but in bed. A remarkable end for a man who had spent his entire adult life at war. He was about 53 years old. He was buried at the Abbey of Saint-Denis, the traditional burial place of Frankish royalty, though he was never himself a king. His tomb was reportedly opened in the 9th century by monks who claimed to find it empty except for a large snake, interpreted, depending on your perspective, as either a sign of divine punishment for his seizure of church lands or simply the inevitable product of Carolingian mythology making. Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi was buried somewhere on the battlefield. His exact grave has never been identified. The battlefield itself, the actual ground where 50,000 or more men fought in October 732, has never been definitively located. Various sites near the city of Musayla Batai have been proposed, but no systematic archaeological investigation has confirmed the location. The battle that may have saved Western civilization left almost no physical trace. What it did leave, what it unmistakably, irreversibly left, was a changed world. A world in which the northern advance of the Umayyad Caliphate had reached its limit. A world in which the Frankish kingdom would become the Carolingian Empire, and then, through centuries of division and struggle, the nations we now call France and Germany. A world in which the alliance between the papacy and the Frankish crown would produce the idea of Christendom, the sense that Europe was a cultural and religious unity, distinct from both the Byzantine East and the Islamic South. A world, in other words, that looks recognizably like the precursor to the one we live in now. One October day, one stubborn man who refused to move, one shield wall that held. History really does turn on moments like that. And that brings us to the question I want to leave you with. 1,300 years later, how should we think about the Battle of Tours? Is it a story about the clash of civilizations, East versus West, Islam versus Christianity? Or is it a story about something more universal, the ability of disciplined, determined people to hold a line against seemingly impossible odds? Does it belong to one side of a religious or cultural divide, or does it belong to all of us as a case study in what human beings are capable of under pressure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I mean that genuinely. If you found this valuable, please subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who care about history. Like the video if you learned something. Share it with someone who you think would be fascinated by this, and leave a comment, even just, "I watched the whole thing." Those comments mean more than you know, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.